Thanks so much for pressing play. Legends and Losers is sponsored by our good friends at Oracle NetSuite. Check out netsuite.com/legends to turbocharge your growth. And we're also sponsored by my new #1 best-selling book with the amazing Heather Clancy, Niche Down. Check out nichedownbook.com. Today we hang out with my buddy, entrepreneur turned venture capitalist, Jeff Richards. He's having one of those amazing, legendary careers here in Silicon Valley. We talk about that and his journey. We talk about how to develop young leaders and entrepreneurs. We talk about the power of investing in and building multi-billion-dollar companies and how to do that on a repeated basis, as Jeff and his partners have, and why investing in both China and Silicon Valley is smart. All right. The Ramones said, hey ho, let's go. And David Lee Roth said, you got to roll with the punches to get to what's real. Hello, my legendary friends. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Legends and Losers. And this episode, like so many others, sits right at the heart of our mission. We want to have conversations worth sharing. Conversations that go beyond the BS and get to the real S, so to speak. On a traditional podcast, on a traditional business show of any kind, what you get is a guest who's highly media trained with their 3 key talking points, and a host who's got a pre-configured, pre-prescribed narrative that gets deeply edited, and what you and I are served up is this thing called an interview that is actually a highly produced thing, and you really just get a snippet of what happened. That's not what happens here on Legends and Losers. What we try to do is capture lightning in a bottle, have a real conversation with an amazing person where we talk about success and failure, what we lovingly refer to around here as losery, and unpack what it really takes to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And we share that actual dialogue with you. We rarely edit the show. We want you to get the real shit. And that's what we have today with Jeff Richards. I've known Jeff for many years. He's a managing partner at GGV Capital. He focuses primarily on software and internet investing. He's a frequent guest on CNBC. You've probably seen him on many other media outlets. He's a frequent writer. You can get more on his background if you go to legendsandlosers.com and check out our show notes. And if you want to tweet Jeff, that would be cool. You can tweet him on Twitter. Say that 3 times fast. At JRICHLIVE. At JRichLive. And now, my conversation with the legendary Jeff Richards.
Kids are good. I can't complain. Although I feel like we're starting to get into uncharted waters. I think high school is new territory.
Say more about that.
I think it's funny. I mean, when we were growing up, high school was, I think social media gives kids such a broader purview as to what's going on in the world. And you look at something like Instagram, which I love. I love Instagram, the product. Kevin Wheel, who runs product there, is a friend, and I love what they're doing. But like when you were a kid, you probably spent, like for me, I spent time thinking, oh, I'd like to be Michael Jordan, or I'd like to be Magic Johnson. That was about it. In their lives, they've got YouTube stars. They've got people who are good at Fortnite. They've got the Kardashians. They've got, there's so many things coming at them, which I think is, on the one hand, it's great because it's kind of a message like, hey, you can do anything. Like there's so many avenues you can pursue in life. You don't have to go to college and go work for IBM. But at the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on them. I think it's not easy being a kid in high school these days. And we're just starting to get into that with my oldest. So it's, you just see it where there's pressure to, pressure to be creative, pressure to hang with the right kids. That's all the stuff that we were doing. It's just magnified because they've got Snapchat and Instagram and all these other things. So we'll see. Uncharted waters.
And maybe this question answers itself, but you think the fact that all their friends and then there's all this other stuff are broadcasting this sort of ideal at them all the time, you think it makes it tougher for them than it did for us?
Yeah, because there's a when you were a kid, you probably had your mom or your dad saying, "Hey, whatever you're doing it well. Keep doing that." Taking you to practice or whatever. I just think they've got this like existential question that at least I didn't really feel like I hit till post college when I moved to San Francisco. When all of a sudden you're like, "Wow, there's a whole world out there of people doing interesting shit," and am I doing as well as I should be? I think that hits kids earlier, right? Because they've got social media, because they're seeing all these things online. There's a lot more of a, it opens their eyes to things that they could do, but it also kind of creates this angst. Like, am I doing the things I should? Which it does for everybody at all ages, right? I mean, I see people on Instagram, they're at Bottle Rock last week, and I'm like, well, fuck, why am I not in the front row at Bottle Rock, right? But think about that as a 14-year-old kid, and now you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, everybody else is doing cool shit, and I'm not. Versus just being happy reading your book or doing whatever you're doing. So it's going to be interesting, and again, we've got 4, so we got one to learn from and 3 to hopefully perfect our game with. But it's interesting and actually relevant to your Legends and Losers podcast. I think it's one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs to deal with, right? Which is most people in my world, at least, are starting companies in their early 30s, right at the same time they're trying to get married, they're trying to have kids, they're trying to buy a house. Like, you throw a lot of shit on the fire as an entrepreneur in your mid-30s, and it's hard to deal with. It's a lot. I mean, I had a conversation with an entrepreneur company I'm on the board of. He's probably 35 years old. He hasn't taken a vacation in 2 years. And I was like, dude, you need to, I will personally pay for you to take your wife somewhere. Leave your kids at my house, go to Napa, go somewhere, but you can't, you're not going to look back and say, yeah, that was a great 2 years, unless you can take a little bit of time out and chill a little bit. And that's super hard for tech entrepreneurs in the Bay Area in particular. It feels to me like people outside the Bay Area are a little more balanced, but here it's tough.
Do you think it's tougher now than when you and I were entrepreneurs and operating guys?
I don't know if I think the pace of play is faster. Right? Companies get bigger. I mean, you couldn't have built Uber 20 years ago, right? There was no mobile, there was no internet, there was no, I mean, for God's sakes, the majority of the population didn't even have a credit card on the internet. So the pace of play, and we see this in China with our business as well, the pace of play is so fast when you get it right that puts trickle down pressure on you as an entrepreneur to grow your business at that pace. And it's not a natural pace. I mean, not every company is going to become Uber. Not every company is going to become Airbnb. And I think one of the challenges in the entrepreneurial community in tech is, how do you line up the natural pace of growth for a good company with, the expectations that come with raising a lot of capital? And there's a lot of capital in the market. So you've got companies raising hundreds of millions of dollars that are maybe in a category that can't support that kind of growth. And you end up just this pretty interesting challenge where at some level the entrepreneur knows they're growing at an unsustainable rate, or the business isn't working as well as it should be. And the investors know that. But a lot of times they're not having that conversation, right? The investor's saying, go, go, go. And the entrepreneur's like, I'm going. And they both know there's some things that aren't working, but they're not having that conversation. I think that's a misalignment you want to try and get a hold of if you can.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Jeff, because I've always been somebody that's, go, 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 of course. And I would agree with you. From everything I can tell, it's faster today than it was even in the 90s when the internet boom was going on.
For sure.
And so I find myself today, and this sounds so crazy because my entire life and business, I essentially said the exact opposite, trying to get entrepreneurs to slow down a little.
Totally.
And not just take your wife or husband to Napa, but like slow the fucking business down a little bit. And one of the, not that there's a huge corollary between a business and a podcast, at least in my case, because it's a hobby. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about Legends and Losers is building something real. And sort of building it brick by brick and having an experience of building it brick by brick. Like, we do something and then it has this outcome, and then we do this other thing and it has this outcome. And look, I won't be satisfied until, we're the greatest podcast in the world. But that said, I know by way of example that our fans are real fans. Like, it's very real because they email and they tweet and they do all the things they do. And so if you go back to a business, the satisfaction of shipping a product that is a great fucking product, and the satisfaction of having customers use that product and love that product and become ambassadors. And so there's an element of sort of doing it right. If I don't know how else to express it,
Well, think about the analogy
building a real foundation as opposed to something that is disposable.
Think about the analogy in sports when, I played basketball in college. The best players have that ability to slow down the game, right? They always talk about slowing down the game, and they really do, right? I mean, I remember I played with a guy who was an all-Ivy point guard on our team, and he just had an amazing ability. The game felt like it moved slowly for him. He always could tell where people were going to be, where the ball should go, what the next iteration of the game was going to be. I wasn't quite there. And I was there in high school, but I wasn't there in college. The game was moving fast for me. And I think it's the same thing in business where, I work with we were fortunate to invest in a company called Gladly, which is a repeat founder named Joseph Antonelli, who was a partner at Greylock and spun out to start this company. He's basically trying to build Workday for customer care. But when you sit with Joseph, you feel like the game is slowed down for him, right? He's got a plan. He's got a 90-day plan. He's got a 6-month plan. He's got a 12-month plan. He's got a 5-year plan. When he has a board meeting, he does it on a Word document, right? He's like, guys, I'm going to write down my thoughts. We're going to have a conversation, and it'll be a good meeting. I've got, and his board meetings rarely last more than 2 hours. I've got entrepreneurs that are running so hard, they create 75-page decks for their board meetings that last 5 hours.
Yeah.
Right? When the game is moving slowly for you, when you're building a company at the right pace, a board meeting is part of the company building. It's not a moment in time. It's not some big production. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think look, some people get it early. And I think no matter when you get this skill, it definitely, you develop it over time. I see it in my work today. I do, of course, as you know, I did about a decade of kind of coaching and consulting. I don't do very much of it anymore, but I still do a little. And I know, at least in the domains that I have expertise, the ball moves a lot slower for me than everybody else, like a lot. You can just tell. And so there's real fun in being, I never thought I would be anything other than I was in my 20s and 30s, right? And so I never thought that I would be the old master sensei. But it's a fun role in part because you can see that and you go, yeah? You want to know what happens next, Jimmy? and we fucking know what happens.
True. Right? It's so true.
Or you look them straight in the eye and you go, listen, I don't care how many times you wrap the Mustang around a fucking lamp pole. I've seen it, done it. Like, you just can't freak me out. I don't care what you do.
All right.
You could be humping a donkey in the bathroom, and that wouldn't freak me out. Like,
so the question is, how do you take that experience? And this is the thing we struggle with as investors and board members, because we know we can back 3-time repeat founders in their 40s and 50s that have a ton of experience, and they're going to take less time to figure shit out because they've done it. But how do you get that 30-year-old or that 25-year-old? How can you accelerate their learning so that they really do understand those things and the game slows down? It's really hard to do, right? And I think one of the smartest things, obviously, and Mark Zuckerberg ever did was he went and hired Sheryl Sandberg. And Sheryl built an incredible executive team at Facebook, most of whom are still there 10 years later. Right? There was a great article, I think it was in Recode or Information a few weeks ago, talking about it's amazing, given all the wealth that's been created, that all those folks are still there. And they're there because the games kind of slowed down for them as they were building that company, I think. And it's so hard to get that as a 25 or 30-year-old. When I was a 25-year-old entrepreneur, I was working my ass off. I was coming home at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock every night. I had a shitty social life. I was stressed. I probably wasn't doing as well as I could have been at work. But how do you, this is one of the things we try and figure out. We've got a program called Founders and Leaders It's all about coaching founders and helping them become better leaders. But how do you help those epic founders become better leaders and better CEOs at an early age? So you don't have to wait till you're 50, right? Because, you know, a lot of times folks who are in their 40s or 50s, particularly if they've been successful, they don't want to go back and be working 7 days a week and stressed and everything else. So how do you help that 25 or 30 or 35-year-old figure those things out earlier and be more successful as a founder and an exec? And it's something we're trying to figure out. And I think when we look back at this 5 or 10 year window in Silicon Valley, it's going to be one of the big untold stories, is that people, you know, you can give a founder money, but if you don't help them become a better leader, their chance of success is, you know, you can catch lightning in a bottle with a great product, but for most, they don't do that, right? They go through iterations and they go through trials and they go through product launches that are okay. And, you know, it takes a bunch of iteration to build a great company. So it's something we're trying to figure out and investing as much time and money in as we can, but it's, you know, it's one of those age-old challenges. How do you help somebody who's early in their career figure out what the people who are later in their career already know?
Yeah, I think, and I say this not like an answer, but like hopefully like an opening. The aha for me on it is, are you curious? You know, when I was a kid and I was in those positions, maybe it was part of how I got started, because I got thrown out of school at 18 for being stupid. So the only ways I could learn was by doing, by reading, and by seeking out coaches and mentors. And so I did all of those things, lots of them. And reading's hard for me. I'm fucking dyslexic. And, you know, but like when you read Ogilvy on advertising, at least as a kid, my eyes get big and open. Like, wow, this David Ogilvy dude knows some shit. Like, I need to write some of this down, right? And so lots of good reading. And then I had to seek out help because there was no other way. And so from the very beginning, I had to be open. I had to be curious. And listen, I'm sure I was a pain in the ass and I was very opinionated and all those things that I think a lot of young, aggressive, successful people are. And so I guess this leads me to a question, Jeff, which is, you know, is curiosity something you're looking for in these younger entrepreneurs?
No question. Curiosity and self-awareness. So self-awareness is a big challenge, right? As an entrepreneur, and it's stark. Like on the spectrum, we have founders who can't wait to get mentors and coaches and board members and super talented execs around them that are better than they are. And then we have entrepreneurs who don't want any help at all. And, you know, I would say by and large, the ones who are curious, self-aware, are the ones that do the best, right? How do you find those people who are self-aware enough to know they need help, curious to go seek out great people that can be helpful to them, and then have the kind of personality? Like, you know, the other thing that can be challenging is you introduce a founder to a great mentor and they don't click, or they don't follow up, or they don't do whatever, right? Because they're quote unquote too busy. And nothing will burn you out more as a mentor or a coach than somebody who doesn't actually want to get help, right? So that's the other thing I try and tell founders is, look, if you're going to reach out for help, be engaging, be interested, be conscious of the person's time. That person will create a ton of value for you, but you got to respect their time and respect the intellect and respect the conversation. And then, you know, put into practice some of the things they tell you, right? Nothing is worse. That my co-founder of my first company used to always say, the best psychologists work with people who want to get better, right? There's nothing worse than giving somebody advice that they don't take over and over and over and over.
It's funny you say that, because I haven't really talked to many people about this, but that's one of the principal reasons I left Play Bigger, the company. Because after about a decade of being a coach, mentor, advisor, consultant, whatever the fuck, even board member, what I realized is the vast majority of CEOs and executives, at least that I had encountered in that time, and I've been involved as an advisor in one or investor in one way or another in over 50 fucking companies. They don't want a fucking mentor, advisor, board member at all. They want you to get the fuck out. They're interested, you know, they're right. They're not interested. And so if they're not interested, go fuck yourself. I'm not interested. And so that's why I don't do it as a living anymore. I do a little bit of it under very special circumstances. But today, if you want me as an entrepreneur to coach you, you have to fucking jump over, right? You have to spin on your head and shit quarters and a lot of yes, sir. And I say 50 push-ups and you do 60. And, otherwise I'm just not interested.
Right.
And look, and I get why they don't want it. They're too busy doing their thing. And if that's the case, go do your thing. It's why I don't do it anymore. Right.
Right. But the thing I try to explain to folks is, like, if you look at the best golfers on the PGA Tour, the top 10 guys, they all have a psychologist. They have a coach. They have a short game coach. They have somebody who fucking dresses them. Right. I mean, it's like, if you want to be the best at what you're doing, don't you want to get the best people you possibly can around you? And whether it takes time or money, or I'll tell you a story. I had a couple of years ago, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, I had a founder who said, hey, yeah, I'd be open to having a coach or a mentor. And he said, who would you recommend I meet with? And I said, well, I have a guy who's probably one of the greatest tech CEOs that's ever lived in Silicon Valley. He runs a $20 billion company, and I know him, and he's an investor in our fund, and I'd be happy to connect you. But if I connect you, make sure you take advantage of it. He said, yeah, absolutely. Connected him over email, and I stayed out of it, right? I don't want to bug him. Don't want to stay on him. And about a year later, I said, hey, did you ever, I won't use the guy's name, but did you ever connect with the guy I introduced you to? He said, oh, you know what? I forgot. Could you reconnect us again? And I looked at him like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, first of all, I wasted one of my bullets. I don't get to use that bullet very often. And number two, do you think that guy wants to meet with you after you blew him off over email? It's a guy who runs a $20 billion company, and you're running a 50-person company. You couldn't find time to meet with him? Are you kidding me?
I just had this happen. This guy comes at me like crazy. He hits my LinkedIn, he hits my Twitter, email, He's backed by one of the top VC firms. You know them very well. His VC firm partner hits me, and let's just call him Jimmy. Jimmy wants to meet you, and Jimmy's admin emails me, and Jimmy emails me, and Jimmy's got to fucking meet me, and I read your book, and I need your help. And like, Jimmy's got to fucking, he needs to talk to me, and great. Awesome. So, and he's backed by some of the top guys, and so great. So we scheduled a call with him and his CMO. Jimmy's not on the fucking call. So I told him to go fuck themselves. And I sent the partners at the VC firm an email. I said, hey, Jimmy didn't show for the meeting. Commitment is the number one thing that I look for, particularly given that I'm mostly retired from doing this. I'm out. Yeah. And look, I get it. I get why people are like that. But it is an interesting thing, which is to say, can we be smart enough to learn from other people's failure?
But the flip side is the people who are curious and self-aware and want help. I think one of the beautiful things about Silicon Valley is that people are willing to help, right? I think in the old days on the East Coast in New York, et cetera, it was kind of a fuck you, dog eat dog world. One of the amazing things about Silicon Valley is if you ask somebody for help, they will help, right? If I ask you to do me a favor and go spend an hour with somebody, you'll do it. And I would do it if you asked me. And you see that, I mean, there are billionaires in Silicon Valley who regularly meet with people just to be helpful. So that ecosystem here is alive and thriving, and it's unlike really any other on the planet. But you got to be engaged in it, and you got to realize it's a two-way street. And I was on the board of a company called Aperio with a guy named Chris Barbin was the CEO, the founder and CEO. And Chris is incredibly self-aware, incredibly curious. Well, guess what? On his board, he ended up with, he had me, he had Jim Getz from Sequoia, and he had a partner from General Atlantic. But he also got Jeff Epstein, who was the former CFO of Oracle and DoubleClick and is on the board of Priceline. Amazing guy. He got Matt Thompson, who's the head of worldwide sales for Adobe. Right? Incredible guy who doesn't have a lot of time. And I think that was his only board. He had Keith Kroc from DocuSign and Ariba as a mentor. I mean, Chris had an unbelievable ecosystem of people around him who were helping him build that company. And he grew it from startup to 1,500 employees and sold it for $500 million. And people look at that and go, oh, well, we got lucky or, must have just been hard work. I'm like, it was hard work. And there's always a little bit of luck involved. But Chris did an unbelievable job of cultivating relationships with people that could be helpful to him. Probably the best job of anybody I've seen. Amazing.
Well, and to your point, I think that's a big part of the secret sauce of Silicon Valley. You know, we see these different regions around the world who want to be the Silicon Valley blah, right? And virtually none of them make it. And I think this is a big part of it. And that's also why when people don't take advantage of it, it makes me scratch my head. It's the reason I have a life.
Right.
Like I'd be shaving guys' balls for a living right now if that wasn't true.
I don't know about that. I don't know what that job, I don't know how well that job pays. I don't know if you'd be able to surf on the weekend.
Probably not.
It's true, right? I mean, it's one of Reid Hoffman is the best example of a guy who's been unbelievably successful. He's a billionaire many times over. You know, he's on the board of Microsoft. And yet you see that guy, I see him probably every other week in a cafe or a restaurant, just sitting there giving somebody feedback and advice and coaching. He's on the board of a bunch of startups. He obviously is a partner at Greylock, but like how many people like that are there around the world that make $1 billion and then want to go spend the majority of their time helping other people be successful? It's one of the amazing things about Silicon Valley. If you take advantage of it, it's there. It's there for every single founder in Silicon Valley. It's amazing.
Well, and I think also many of us who are here didn't grow up here. We came here for this. And I'll speak for myself. I feel incredibly fortunate to have had the life that I've had. And I think it's a natural human thing to, if you've had that, to want to share that with other people and to give it away or to give it back, however you want to think about it, right? And I see that all over Silicon Valley. And I think it goes back to, you know, of course, I didn't know Hewlett or Packard, but the stories I've heard about them are like that. I didn't know Andy Grove, but I know plenty of people who did, and Andy Grove was like that. And, you know, so when you go back to the very beginning of Silicon Valley, there were people who were like that from the start. And it's something that I think is hard for people to replicate in other parts of the world. And I couldn't agree more. It's a big part of why it works.
It's starting to happen. So there's do you know Scott Dorsey from ExactTarget? Ever met Scott? He's a great guy. Sold ExactTarget to Salesforce, I think, for several $1 billion a few years ago. And now Salesforce, with that acquisition, has several thousand people in Indianapolis. And Scott created a firm in Indianapolis called High Alpha. It's kind of a combination of an incubator, accelerator, and a venture firm. And Scott is personally mentoring a bunch of these founders as they get started. So, you know, you're seeing it, you know, I think what he realized was in order for Indy to take off as a hub for tech, you've got to have somebody like him who's not only willing to put money into the ecosystem, but the mentorship, the partnership. He's got all these folks from ExactTarget who are acting as board members and mentors for these companies. And I'm pretty bullish on what he's doing. And I think Indy, you know, think about all the great schools that are there. You've got Indiana, you've got Ohio State, you've got Purdue, you've got all these amazing schools that are cranking out engineering talent. All those people don't want to come to Silicon Valley. A lot of them want to stay and work in that area. So I think what Scott's doing is pretty cool.
The cost effectiveness of housing here isn't attracting people from Indiana.
Oh man. But, you know, you think about what he's doing. Steve Case is trying to do this by funding companies all over the U.S. So I think there's something happening outside of Silicon Valley, but it takes people like Scott who have these mega successes and then are willing to replicate the model here in Silicon Valley and give back. You got to have that in those other markets for that to really take off, I think.
Yeah. Do you know Giora Yaron by any chance?
No.
So we recently had him on. He was the chairman of Mercury at the end after the shit hit the fan and everybody was running for the exits. He stood up to be the chairman. And he is considered by most people to be one of the creators, co-founders, if you will, of what in Israel they call Startup Nation, creating a very Silicon Valley-esque like culture in Israel. And I think in my experience, I can't wait to get to talk to you about China, but in my experience, Israel has done as well, if not better, than just about anywhere else in creating that kind of Silicon Valley-like ecosystem. Interestingly enough, as a side note, his current main gig, he's the chairman of Tel Aviv University, and he explicitly says he's trying to get Tel Aviv University to be like Stanford because when you have the education system engage with the entrepreneurial community to create an ecosystem, magic can happen, as we well know. And so I love that these ideas are happening elsewhere in the world, elsewhere in the U.S.
It's definitely happening in Israel. There's no question. I mean, the community there, the startup community, it started in kind of security. That was the main hub that you saw coming out of Israel. And now you see it all over enterprise, even in the consumer space. You've got folks like Adi and Alon at House that have created an amazing company there. So there is no question. Israel has nailed the model. They've got the tech, they've got the founders, they've got the capital. They've nailed it. And you asked about China. China's a little different because, it's interesting. The first generation from kind of 2000 to 2010 in China was all about sort of building Baidu, building Alibaba, building Tencent, these mega tech companies that got built. And then now over the last 5 to 7 years, you've seen people spin out of those companies to start new companies. And so you've got an unbelievable amount of capital that's available. So the venture capital market in China went from a decade ago, it was probably 3 or 4 billion a year. Today it's 30 to 40 billion a year. You're creating mega companies. I mean, Xiaomi probably will be an 80 to 100 billion dollar company. Toutiao will be a 30, 40, 50 billion dollar company. You've got Meituan that'll be a 20, 30, 40, 50 billion dollar company. Didi's a 60 billion dollar company. I mean, and this has all happened in a span of 5 to 7 years. So it's not the ecosystem there, was a combination of an increase in venture capital dollars, but really the executives and founders that have spun out of those major tech companies, and then just this sheer opportunity that's sitting there. I mean, you got 1.3 billion people, you got 800 million mobile users. They're way ahead of the U.S. on social media with WeChat. They're way ahead of the U.S. on mobile payments. The mobile payment market in China is 50 times bigger than the U.S. 50, right? In an economy that is smaller than ours. So the opportunity there is just massive, and the acceleration of the businesses. What takes a company 2 or 3 years to accomplish in Silicon Valley happens in about half that time in China, because the market opportunity is so big.
Now, obviously, some of it is there's a lot more people there, right? So some of it's just that math. What are the other components that are the accelerant on the startup businesses over there?
So one is obviously the market opportunity, just the number of people, the consumer opportunity that you have in front of you with all those mobile users. But one of the other enablers, at least for the last 5 to 7 years, has been cheap labor. So the cost of engineering talent, the cost of product talent, the cost of any talent you were bringing into the company was much lower than it was in the U.S. That's changing. The labor costs are going up. It's still cheaper than the U.S. So you could, what it would cost you to hire 20 or 30 people here in the U.S., you could have 100 working on it in China. And so your time to market's faster. You've got the production capability there in Shenzhen and all the other contract manufacturers that have huge hubs in China. So if you wanted to design and build prototypes, you can literally have the software team or the design team developing that product in the morning and have it built in the afternoon. Whereas most of the companies that are doing that in the U.S., they're doing design and prototyping in the U.S., then somebody travels to China, they spend a week or two there, they work with a contract manufacturer, they come back with the prototype. So just that lag time that you end up with, particularly in the hardware space, is really compressed in China. Now, historically, you go back 5 or 7 years ago, China didn't have the design and software talent that we have here in the U.S. So, but that's all changed in our opinion. You look at categories like IoT, robotics, AI, ML. China is kicking butt in those categories.
And so how interesting for you and your firm, because, I mean, you guys have been there. Remind me, Jeff, how long you guys have been in Asia?
We've been there since 2000, so 18 years.
Yeah. And at least in my mind, and, it's pretty deeply soaked in whiskey, so I may not be giving a couple other firms the credit, but you're the first firm that I can think of that is a Silicon Valley firm, venture firm, with Silicon Valley folks running the firm that said, hey, wait a minute, maybe all the innovation on the planet won't be here. Maybe all the entrepreneurs on the planet won't be here. There's this place over in Asia that's pretty interesting, and you guys plant a flag there now almost 20 years ago. I got to believe that's a huge competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what we've built our brand around. So if you go back to 2000, the folks who started GGV really started it with the idea that it would be a cross-border firm. So half the firm would be in China and half would be in the US. So, one of the ways we think of it is we're not a Silicon Valley firm or a China firm. We're a cross-border firm that does business in both markets. And we're run by a team that's in both markets. So today we have 6 partners, 3 in China, 3 in the US, all equal partners. We're not a Silicon Valley firm doing business in China, and we're not a Chinese firm doing Silicon Valley. We're playing across those borders, and we've in the last 10 years also expanded a little bit into Southeast Asia. So we've got 3 companies in Singapore, and we'll fund more in Southeast Asia. But yeah, it was a huge bet that the team made 15 years ago, 18 years ago. And even if you go back to like 2010, most people in Silicon Valley really didn't know much about China. It wasn't until Alibaba went public in 2014 that all of a sudden everybody kind of woke up and went, holy shit, there's a massive market opportunity there. And we'd love to be a part of that. Well, by that time, it was too late because the venture community in China had grown up. There are hundreds of local Chinese firms now. Capital had flown in there from around the world. And really, if you look at today in China, the only brand that we see that's very prevalent in the U.S. that's also doing business in China like we are is Sequoia. So Sequoia has a tremendous team in China run by Neil Shen, and really, the guys here, Moritz, Leone, Getz, others have all, helped. We're smart enough to see that opportunity, and then smart enough to let Neil really do his thing, and he's built a hell of a franchise in China. But yeah, I'd say the two of us are kind of the firms that come to mind when people think about firms that are doing business across the 2 markets.
And am I misremembering this? But you guys have done some deals together, have you not?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
No, we're lots of opportunity, lots of companies together. But and if you look at Jenny, who's one of our partners in China, Jenny Lee, she was the highest ranked female that's ever been on the Midas list. She was ranked number 10 a few years ago. Our partner Hans Tung, I think this year was ranked like 15th or 20th. He was the Series A investor in Xiaomi. I mean, Xiaomi is, we'll see what happens when it goes public, but a very valuable company. My partner Jishun was the Series A investor in Baidu. And we were, as a firm, we were an early investor in Alibaba Group. We invested in Alibaba in 2003 when it was a $10 million company.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
that was a little bit of a return, huh?
Yeah, Thomas Singh, who's one of the founders of our firm, led that investment and sat on the board for a few years. And yeah, I mean, what an amazing company. I mean, Alibaba today is worth over $500 billion. They spun out Ant Financial, which was recently valued at $150 billion. That is an amazing company, an amazing story. It's created unbelievable wealth throughout that country. There are roughly, I think it's something like 35 million merchants that are on the Alibaba platform. So if you take the average merchant and assume they have 1 or 2, maybe 3 employees, you're talking about somewhere between 50 and 100 million people that have created their family's wealth through Alibaba. It's pretty amazing.
And what's it like for you personally, and for you guys as a firm, to have 1 foot there and 1 foot here, and to be experiencing those kinds of growth numbers and be part of these multi-billion-dollar market cap outcomes?
Well, there's a couple things I think that are unique. One, we have a unique view on the world, which is, I think a lot of folks in the venture capital world in the U.S. are very focused on the U.S., which, rightly so. It's the number 1 economy in the world. It's produced amazing venture returns for decades. But if you live in Atherton and you drive to your office in Sand Hill Road and you invest in companies in Silicon Valley, you maybe don't have a great purview into what's going on in the rest of the world. And one of the things we always like to say is there's 7.3 billion people in the world. There's only 300 million in the U.S. So if your market opportunity is 300 million, you're missing the other 95% of the world. And I think we have a lens where we're looking at that 7.3 billion, right?
I thought the world ended at Big Sur,
right,
and Mendocino, and the California border and the Pacific Ocean. Isn't that what we're dealing with here?
Right, exactly. So I think if you step back for a minute and you think about the world from 7 billion people, there's a couple things you need to think about. One, the average income in the US is $42,000. The average income in the Bay Area is obviously much higher. The average income, when you get into Southeast Asia or China or Latin America or India or Africa, average income's usually below $10,000 a year, right? So you've got people who are living in a very different world than we are in America, and understanding that world is hard. It's hard to understand the issues they have with banking and payments and healthcare and education and language. And so if you look at some of the companies that we've backed over the last decade, they've been companies that are offering technology and services to that audience that don't apply to the audience in Silicon Valley at all. And I'll give you one great example, which is an e-commerce company called Wish, that today is the most valuable private e-commerce company in the US. It's valued at roughly $9 billion. We backed Wish in the Series B in 2014 when it was a little tiny company. And I remember talking to a number of folks in venture, and they were like, who would buy that shit? Talking about the stuff that was for sale on Wish, because it was relatively inexpensive stuff from China. So Wish today, multi-billion-dollar e-commerce business. You can buy anything imaginable on their app. They have, I think, over 30 million SKUs and millions of merchants in China that largely produce unbranded goods that are sold to the rest of the world. And what Peter and Danny, the founders of Wish, saw was what Peter calls Amazon subprime. So the average Amazon Prime customer makes $100.
That's fucking genius. The minute you said it, I got it, right?
Yeah, average Amazon Prime customer makes $100,000 a year. He's going after a demographic that makes a fraction of that. And so his audience is not the person looking to spend, $2,000 on a TV or $800 on a pair of ski boots or whatever. His audience are the people.
This is not somebody who would subscribe to underarm deodorant.
These are people who want $2 t-shirts, right? They need 50-cent charging cables for their phone. They need, they've got super basic stuff that they want, and it's all available coming from China. And Peter and Danny created a platform for them to do that. But their audience is an audience that was largely ignored by Silicon Valley. And they saw that opportunity and went and created that platform, and today have created the most valuable e-commerce company in the US, the most valuable private e-commerce company in the US. But I think the reason I tell that story is because I think the reason we saw that as a great investment opportunity was because of our view, seeing China, seeing Southeast Asia, seeing these other markets, and saying the average consumer doesn't live in Atherton and drive a $100,000 Mercedes, and, hang out at whatever, the Rose
at Bucks or whatever.
Right,
yeah.
Right. The average consumer is fighting it out day to day to feed their kids and help their kids have a better life than them, and is trying to get by on a basic set of products. And that's the audience that Wish caters to. And so I think, A, I'm proud of the fact that we see that global opportunity. B, I think it gives us an edge in the way we invest, because we do see that opportunity. And then you've got categories like transportation, which, in the US, we kind of take for granted that we have good roads and clean air and, things like that. That's not the case in other markets. And so we've made a huge bet on transportation in China and Southeast Asia. We were an early investor in Didi, which is the largest ride-sharing company in China. We've invested in a company called Hello Bike, which is one of the largest bike-sharing companies. We've invested in an electric vehicle company called Xiaopeng. We've invested in a scooter company called New. We've invested several $100 million in next-generation transportation technology and services because we see the need for it outside the U.S. And I just don't think that's a lens that a lot of investors here in the U.S. have.
It's such a powerful insight. And just the fact that you get on planes, right? A lot of VCs, if it's not within a 30-mile radius of Sand Hill Road, they're not going to go to it. And at least last time we talked, which has been a while, I got the impression you were spending a fair amount of your own personal time in Asia as well.
Yeah, I go to China 3 or 4 times a year. I'm in Singapore once or twice a year. Yeah, I think I traveled 180,000 miles last year. So.
Which for a VC is a giant amount of travel, because most of them it's kind of close to zero, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think more folks, particularly the later stage folks, are getting on planes more because they're realizing a lot of larger opportunities are outside of Silicon Valley. But yeah, I mean, historically there was definitely a culture and venture of folks wanting to invest locally. And look, if you look at the U.S., I think Silicon Valley still attracts probably 60-70% of the venture capital dollars. So you can do very well just investing in Silicon Valley. We just have a different model. We think that there's a big global opportunity. We think we will back better entrepreneurs and generate better returns for our LPs by having that global view. And, it takes some travel. I mean, I think this is I'm not going to win Father of the Year for this, but I think over the last 3 weeks, I probably slept at home 5 or 6 nights, because I was in Beijing for a week. Then I was in Menlo Park for several days where I had to be here and I had to stay in a hotel. And then, last week we did a global team offsite where we took all 65 people in our firm to a remote location and got everybody together for 4 days to hang out with each other. Because when you have people in China and people in the US, they don't see each other in person that often.
Now, as your kids get further into this teenagehood, if you take your gal on any of these trips and leave them home alone to have parties and shit, then you'll be Father of the Year.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I might. I would love for my wife to come travel with me, but I don't think we're going to be leaving. I have 4 kids at home would be a bad recipe. My son would probably love it. He's only 7 and my oldest daughter's 14. So he'd probably think, yeah, this is pretty cool. I get to hang out with the girls, but no.
So, hey, let's go back to fatherhood just for a sec, if we could. What advice would you give to that younger entrepreneur, the one you were talking about earlier, who's maybe in their early 30s, about being a dad, or for that matter, being a mom, and trying to get all of this to work all at the same time?
It's so hard, right? And I was there. So I started my second company in 2003. I got married in 2002, started my second company in 2003. I had almost no money. I didn't pay myself my co-founder and I didn't pay ourselves anything for the first year. My wife was working at Montgomery Securities, had to be on the trading floor at 4 a.m. or 4:30, maybe it was. So I'm basically living off her salary, her health care. She has to be at work at 4:30. And then in 2004, we had our first child. So I went through that and I remember how stressful it was. It was crazy. And so what I try to tell, it's sort of like your point about the coaching and advising you're doing today. I look back at that 10, 12 years ago and say, did I handle it well? What could I have done better? And the hardest thing at the time is the fear of the unknown, right? You've never been a dad before. Nobody gives you a playbook. There's no training manual for being a dad. You've never been at least I'd never been a husband before. So I'm not sure if I'm doing that right. There's a few things I thought I was doing reasonably well, in order to win my wife over. But it's.
But you made 4 people.
We did.
So you got that part right.
We figured that out. But it was tough and it was stressful. And probably the thing that I did not do well was I wish I would have had somebody telling me, here's how to create some balance, right? Here's how to block off time on the weekend. Here's how to go on vacation without bringing your laptop. Here's how to create a little balance. And the biggest thing that I try to coach entrepreneurs on that are in their late 20s or early 30s today is, number one, carve out that time, right? So carve out some time where it's, just you and your wife away for a day or two. Don't bring your laptop. Trust me, the company will still be there, right? There's a great podcast that I listened to where they interviewed the founder of Patagonia, and he talked about how he lives in Jackson Hole for 6 months out of the year. And the guy interviewing him says, well, what happens if something goes wrong at the company? And he goes, what the fuck are they going to call me for? If the warehouse is on fire, do you think I know how to put out a goddamn fire? He's like, somebody will figure it out. They don't need me. And I think that's a very powerful concept and it's a good litmus test for you as a founder and a CEO. Can you be away for 3 or 4 days and something goes wrong and the team that's there figures out how to deal with it? And there's 2 things there. One, if they can't figure it out, you got the wrong fucking team. and 2, if you can't leave for 3 days, you haven't hired the right people, right? I mean, you haven't done a good job of building out that team if you can't be gone for a few days. And so it's a hard litmus test, but you do see really good founders, particularly repeat founders, that have figured out how to create some balance and put that team in place. And I think it's empowering for the team as well, right? Somebody says to you, hey, I'm going to be gone for a week. You guys handle it. If something goes wrong, let me know. But otherwise, I'm assuming you got it. That's empowering for a team.
Yeah. One of my favorite expressions, I learned this back in my Mercury days. It's an Israeli saying or a Hebrew saying that says the graveyards are full of indispensable men.
Right. Right, exactly.
Like part of it is get over yourself too, right?
Totally, totally. And so you find repeat. I see it a lot with repeat founders. I gave you the example of Joseph earlier at Gladly, who you just, you know, I'm very confident that if I said, "Hey man, can you be gone for a week?" He'd say, "Of course I can." Because I put the team in place around me that knows what to do and can run this operation without me there. And by the way, I'm important, but I'm not that important, right? To your point.
I remember, when I hung up my gloves as an operating guy after Mercury. So I was 38 at the time. And from 18 to 38, the most amount of time I had taken off was, if I remember right, was 10 days, like in one stretch.
Yeah.
Because I can remember having 2 weeks off once it was all, like, I remember when it was over and they sort of said, hey, kind of stop coming in, right? Like, you're good. And I remember that first window of 2 weeks, and I thought back and I thought, fuck, that I never did that.
No, it's hard.
And that, I mean, I don't know that 2-week vacations are a great thing for entrepreneurs, but that's crazy to think that from 18 to 38, the most time I ever took off was 10 days. I had actually convinced myself that rather than take long vacations, the answer was more short vacations. So I took a lot of 3-day weekends and stuff. And those are very healthy, but it's very different. You don't unplug for 3 days in Hawaii or whatever.
No. And that's what most of us do, right? I mean, I did the same thing. You know, I've always been a big fan of like, I'll leave midday on Friday and, come back Sunday night. But then you're still on your phone, you're still on your computer, you're still plugged in. And I think particularly as you get married and start to have kids, it's so, and I'm guilty. I'm sure my kids would say I spend way too much time on my laptop and on my phone. But I have tried, as I've gotten older, I've tried to block out that time. One of the best time periods of the year for us is we close our office for a week after Christmas. And
the week after Christmas.
The week after Christmas. We started doing it probably 5 or 6 years ago. And it's the best week of the year because you force everybody to take that time out. It's obviously a good time to spend with your family, but you eliminate the loop, right? You eliminate the communication loop where people are emailing you and you're emailing them back. And, it's hard to do, but that for me is the best week of the year because it's the week where I really can take that time out and hang out with my kids and my family and not feel guilty. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it also reminds me of how much of my life I had no New Year's Eve, right? Because New Year's Eve is always
the end of the quarter,
Q4, and fucking A, you are on the phone,
totally,
and you are like sweating it, and you're calling the buyer, and you're calling the gal, and
I'll never forget. 2005, I was in Vegas, New Year's Eve, trying to close a $5 million enterprise software license deal at 10 o'clock at night.
Right.
I'm in Vegas with my wife and a bunch of friends, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "This is the most important deal I'll ever close," and it was. But it's hard. Look, being a founder is stressful. I think part of what I try to do as a board member is just have empathy, right? Have empathy when a founder's stressed or dealing with a hard issue or whatever. Not get pissed, and just help them through those day-to-day battles because no company goes up into the right. Every company goes through a bunch of gyrations, a bunch of ups and downs, or shit that goes wrong. It's never perfect. And so just trying to listen, trying to have some empathy, trying to connect them with folks who can be helpful. And I think that's why you've seen over the last 10 years, you've seen a trend towards operators going into venture capital. When I was raising money in the late 90s, 99% of the people I pitched were former investment bankers who'd never run a business before.
Yeah.
And I think the trend of operators and entrepreneurs going into venture has been a good one. I think it's been super healthy.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've noticed that myself over my time in Silicon Valley, that in the beginning it was a lot of people with finance backgrounds and very few entrepreneurs. And now it seems, I don't know, you would know better than me, but is it almost opposite? Has it flipped?
Yeah, most of the folks coming into venture in the last 5 to 7 years have been operators, which I think is great. I mean, you look at Mark and Ben, who started Andreessen Horowitz, they were operators. You look at Keith Raboy going from Square or joining Khosla. You look at, John Lilly, who ran Mozilla, is now at Greylock. So I think that trend has been great. And I think, it's not easy. It's not perfect. There's a lot of things you got to learn as an operator trying to become an investor. But I think it's been great for entrepreneurs. I think there's just a lot more empathy for how hard it is being a founder and a CEO, because it's hard. It's a hard fucking job, right? It's high risk, high reward, high stress. And obviously high reward. Like, when it works, people here become insanely wealthy. But it's a hard, for every Mark Zuckerberg, there's literally thousands of founders that started and tried and failed. And it's brutal. It sucks when you fail. It's not fun.
Well, and I was poking around your website just to kind of make sure I was up to date on what you folks were up to. And I noticed in your bio, you put your failure front and center in your bio. And we've invented this word around here. We call it, we try to make it fun. We try to make failure fun. And we're trying to make loser a good word, not a bad word. So we call it losery. It's like, well, there's going to be a lot of losery along the way. And like, let's get ready for our losery. And so, but as a VC, a lot of VCs try to project an image of nothing but success. And so I had to ask you why you put your losery front and center there on the website.
Yeah, I mean, just one, to be honest, right? I learned a lot from that experience, but it failed. We raised $135 million and I walked away with nothing, and the investors walked away with nothing. It was a brutal, the dot-com bubble was brutal, but there's a lot of things we could have done differently. I started the company when I was 25 and I left when I was 30 with nothing. In fact, it was so fun. Your concept of a loser. My father-in-law got up at my wedding in 2002 and gave a toast, and I don't think he'd given a lot of toast in his life, so he was a little nervous, but he got up and he was rambling about my wife and saying all these great things, and he said, and it's just wonderful that she's marrying Jeff and he's unemployed. And when we met him, he was this high-profile founder. He'd been in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes, and we thought he was going to be really, really rich and successful. And now we're not so sure. I was like, "Fuck you, Larry. Hey, come on, dude. How about my buddies are looking at me like this guy's killing you?" But
thanks, Larry. Can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you.
Yeah, so I remind him of that every now and then. But it was tough, and so you go through that whole phase of what you think is success, and then you have failure, and you learn a lot from that. And I certainly applied a lot of the things I learned from the first one into the second one, and the second company was successful, and we sold it and made money, and the investors all made money. And I was really proud to make the investors that invested with me. I was proud to make them money, to say, you gave me, even the guys that gave me $100K to turn around and say, here's X amount of money back. That was pretty cool. And so I think, and look, the majority, it's funny because all you read about in the tech media are the success stories. 90% of the coverage is success. And yet everybody always quotes the stat that 80% of companies fail. So there's a disconnect between the coverage and reality.
And that's it. It's driven me crazy for years. It's part of the motivation for Legends and Losers is not only to unpack the losery, but let's celebrate it a little bit. Like, there's gonna be losery, and there's gonna be a whole bunch of it. And the truth is, I've lost more money than I've made, and I've failed more than I've ever succeeded.
And I think, you look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley had something that didn't work, right? They might have had something that worked, then they tried again and had something that didn't work. And they found a way. You look at Stuart Butterfield at Slack. I mean, Slack is, now one of the most valuable enterprise software companies in the world. But, he started that company as a game company. And I don't know what the time period was, but it was like 6 or 12 months in. He basically went to his investors and said, "We're not building a very good game. This ain't going to work. If you want your money back, I'll give you your money back." But along the way, he and his team discovered that they'd built a really killer app for communicating among the team, and that became Slack. Now, would you consider the first iteration a failure? To some degree it was. But he took that and pivoted into something that's become a raging success. And I just...
Oh, and by the way, there's one part of that story that never gets told, and it's the category part.
Right.
Because Stuart didn't do any category design. Who did was David Sachs and the
Yammer.
team of us at Jive. So the early companies in that space created enterprise, social enterprise, business, social business. It had all sorts of different names, but that idea, Facebook for business, right?
Right.
And then, of course, Sachs had the genius to sell for over $1 billion. Congratulations. Jive did not, and committed Harry Carey. And so you had two companies who essentially were the category designers of the space, who exited for different reasons. One committed suicide and the other sold out. And so there's this giant category sitting there going, hey, you've been telling us about the problem for 5 years and now there's no solution. Oh, Stuart, nice to meet you. Boom.
So true. I mean, look at Friendster and, what became Facebook and LinkedIn. And I mean, there's so much opportunity for entrepreneurs. I had this conversation with one of our limited partners the other day who was sort of saying to me, like, don't you think all the categories have kind of been played out? And I was like, holy crap, we are still in, inning one of entire categories being invented. You think about personal finance, healthcare, transportation, even enterprise software. I mean, that's a great example where when were Jive and Lithium and Yammer all created? Probably 10 years ago?
Oh, no, more than that.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess early mid 2000s, 2004, 2006 to, I'd have to go back and look. I might be off a little bit, but I'm trying to remember when I was involved with Jive. I don't know. It's been a lot of scotches ago. But it would be, I don't know, the company, I probably left 7 years ago, eight years ago, something like that. So, and the company had been around for probably about that amount of time at that time.
Yeah. And now you look at Slack. I mean, Slack is, if it's not the fastest growing software company on the planet, it's certainly one of the top 2 or 3.
I would bet Zoom's probably giving them a run for their money on that too. I would think. But yeah,
so
I mean, look, they're doing
just so much opportunity. So much opportunity.
Well, yeah, and I would find it funny somebody would think that. I mean, to your point, you look at all the emerging categories and all the emerging category. The thing that everybody forgets in the tech industry, and I think it's true in a lot of other industries, is today's solutions are tomorrow's problems. So if you just go through the list, machine learning, AI, robotics, all of the virtual reality, augmented reality, IoT, all of it, right? End. Well, those things are going to spin other new categories, and those things are all going to create problems. So you're going to have IoT management software to manage all your IoT shit, right? And on and on and on. And so, Duncan Davidson and my buddy Kevin Maney and I think Mike Maples and a bunch of people are starting to say this is equivalent to the late 1800s, early 1900s, where we got electric light and we got the car and we got refrigeration and there's a 20-year period of massive boom of innovation in new categories and were transformative. And so, if they're right, then you're right, which is no, we're not in the ninth inning. I'm not even sure we're in the first inning.
Right. Well, here's another way I describe it. So a lot of our investors ask us if we're in a bubble, right? Are we in a valuation bubble? The market's gone crazy. It's been going up and to the right for 10 years. And I said, look, I don't, I'm not a prognosticator. That's not my thing. But here's an anecdote I'll give you. When Amazon went public in 1995 with a $450 million market cap, there were 120 million people on the internet. The whole fucking internet was 120 million people. Like, that's, I mean, think about that, right? And now you've got over 2 billion. You'll have another several billion that come on in the next few years. Like, how big is that market for all the different services that are going to get created for healthcare and language learning? And I mean, all these, like ride sharing, that category, that category, as we think about it with Uber and Lyft and Didi, didn't even really exist. I mean, you had taxis. That was a primitive version of what we're now thinking of as ride sharing. Now you got scooters ripping around the sidewalk. Like, there's just a lot of runway here for innovation. And again, when we think about that audience of 7 billion people around the world, it's just, it's such an untapped opportunity. There's so much opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have we're going to have, well, maybe not 7, we're going to have 5 billion people on the internet for sure. We're going to get to, or close. We're going to get to somewhere around, there will be more people on planet Earth on the internet than not.
Right.
And my buddy Kevin thinks even more important than the internet is actually the cloud, because the cloud is the internet and I don't necessarily want to put words in his mouth, but it's the internet really doing shit, right? Like It's not just HTML pages and naked ladies, right? It's like real shit is happening.
Yeah, and then if you look at what's happening with blockchain and crypto, right? I mean, that's a whole nother world, a whole nother universe that's essentially being created with just all kinds of amazing potential, and it's in the first out of the first inning. I mean, it's so early in that space.
And, you think about our background in enterprise tech. As I've begun to understand blockchain is distinct from crypto, the very real scenario in my head is every single enterprise, I wouldn't even want to call them business process, let's call them business activity, is going to have an app connected to the blockchain. That's just how it's going to be, right? So enterprise business, not just apps, are going to be completely reimagined because of what blockchain can do.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of decentralized infrastructure, right? Today we have very centralized infrastructure. The whole idea of decentralized infrastructure could be incredibly powerful. But one of the conversations we have internally as a firm, when we look at, as an investor, you're always looking at TAM. What's the total addressable market for this company we're looking at? And one of the things we keep talking about is how much could that TAM increase? Like, you look at when Netflix went public in the 90s as well, people kind of thought, oh yeah, there's probably a TAM there of a few million subscribers that would pay for movies over DVD, blah, blah, blah. But nobody was thinking 20 years ahead and saying, well, what if they build their own production studio? And what if people are accessing it over high-speed connections in their home on the internet? And what if they start to do it on mobile devices? And what if, the audience is really 7 billion people around the world? Nobody did that math. And today, Netflix is worth more than Disney, and it's a $100 billion company. But
I just saw this today.
It might be a $500 billion company.
I just saw this today. Spotify is paying Amy Schumer $1 million to launch a podcast.
Yeah, I'm long Spotify for sure. Yeah. For sure. So, I think people are underestimating the TAM on Spotify. So I'll give you another example of a cat. You'll like this because it talks about category, but are you familiar with Peloton?
The exercise bike company?
Yeah.
I love that thing.
Yeah. So
I don't have one, but I love the idea. Do you have one?
Yeah, we have one. We love it. It's great. So the gym membership category has been around for, I don't know how many decades, and it's big. There's 55 million people in the US with a gym membership. The workout facilities in hotels have been around forever. In the last few years, you had some innovation with things like SoulCycle and a few other things that have kind of been a twist on, CrossFit. And John comes along and says, well, what if I built a killer exercise bike, spin bike, that was connected to the web and could actually give people a real live class-like experience with killer instructors and a community type feeling to it. So, and the cynic would say, wait a minute, it's a spin bike with a video screen connected to the internet, and you're going to charge $2,000 for that and $500 a year for the subscription? Nobody will ever buy that. John said they'll buy it because it's a different experience. It's a community experience. It's gonna drive you to work out. It's gonna give you the kind of feeling that people used to get from religion, the kind of thing that people used to get from being a part of a softball team or whatever. And guess what? He's right. And that company today is a multi-billion-dollar company in a category that has been around forever. Right?
I absolutely love it. Their marketing is genius. They're absolutely doing category design. They were very smart about not positioning it as just a new exercise bike. And I think everything you said is incredibly intriguing. And I hope they kill everybody. I think it's wonderful because, not to get corny, but they're using the technology to create connectedness and well-being. And I think that is very cool. All right. So before I let you go, just one other thing. How do you think about talking to your kids, Jeff, about losery?
Super hard. When kids fail, it's hard. It's hard to watch as a parent, and there's been this culture over the last decade of sort of everybody gets a trophy, right? And so in some ways it inoculates them from the feeling of like, no, you actually lost the game. It is hard. And it's hard to watch as a parent because you don't want, you never want to see your kid bummed out or crying. But, like we just talked about, one of the reasons repeat founders are good at what they do is because they've gone through those failure cycles, right? They've put their hand on the stove and gotten burned. They had something go wrong. And so there's this hard balance with kids of letting them fail, letting them cut their knee, letting them not make the team, letting them do whatever, and also trying to pump them up and try and help them be successful. And so the approach we've taken, rightly or wrongly, is to just try and push them to do a lot of different stuff. Get involved in a lot of different stuff. Hey, if you try lacrosse and you don't like it and you get smacked in the face and after a year you don't want to play, that's fine. But try it because you might hit on something you actually do like. And but man, it's hard. It's so hard. It's way harder as a parent to watch your kid fail than it is to fail on your own. Way harder.
Yeah,
right? It's kind of like, hey, I can deal with it. But watching your kids fail is hard. But hopefully we all have a shared view that letting them fail a few times builds that resilience and builds them stronger as a person. I actually am reading a book right now called The Upside of Stress. I don't know if you've read it, but it's really a great book. And one of the things that the author talks about is oftentimes, the most successful people have grown up in really challenging environments, right? Think about great athletes or even great people in business that came from nothing. And one of the reasons they become great is because they build character through failure and stress and getting punched and knocked down. And it sucks in the moment, but over time it builds a much stronger person. And I think that as a parent, you want to be loving, you want to be hugging, you want to be supportive, but you also want to let them fail. But it's hard.
Yeah, I can only imagine. All right, Jeff, anything else before we kick out of this wave?
No, thanks for having me on, man. It was fun.
It's great catching up with you. You're an awesome guy, and thank you so much. Be legendary, my friend.
Cool. Take care.
Will do. Whew. There he is, the amazing Jeff Richards. If you know somebody who would benefit from this conversation, why not share it with them right now? And we would love you just a little bit extra if you posted this conversation, this dialogue on social media right now. Why not? Now, I'd like to tell you about our founding sponsor, the good people at NetSuite. They want to help empower you to grow your business. And there's an interesting dichotomy in business. You start off and you got a big dream, and maybe you want to niche down and you want to design and dominate a great category. And if you catch a tiger by the tail and you start growing, growth becomes the problem. And so isn't that funny in life? The problem is we're not growing. The problem is we don't have enough revenue. And then the problem can turn into, holy moly, we got way too much, and how do we cope with this growth? And so NetSuite is the platform for growth for entrepreneurs who start in the garage and make it to the IPO and beyond. It's a complete business software that runs in the cloud, that scales with you, allows you to keep control of your costs and manage your growth. It empowers CEOs and business owners to develop a truly collaborative environment. And who doesn't want to collaborate? It allows you to leverage the strengths and capabilities and resources of your business across your business. It's a complete business management software, from accounting to your front office, omni-channel capabilities, as well as even HR. And NetSuite is surprisingly low cost. Our good friends at NetSuite are offering you a chance to dig in, to get real about what it takes to grow your business and manage your growth with a free 1-hour growth review. Go to netsuite.com/legends and you'll be able to schedule your free 1-hour growth review with an expert in your industry, because NetSuite actually has purpose-built capabilities for different types of businesses in different types of industries. So check out netsuite.com/legends today. And if you want to get a hold of us, check out legendsandlosers.com. We have a fantastic website, I must say. Thank you, Jamie J., and who also happens to be the co-producer of the show. Thank you, Sarah Parrish, as well, for producing the show. And if you want to get a hold of us, check out legendsandlosers.com. We're going to start taking some questions. So if you want to have me answer a question on Legends and Losers, email blackhole@legendsandlosers.com, and you can always tweet me at Lochhead. All right, we would like to thank the good people at GGV Capital, Jeff's company. Check them out at ggvc.com. The new #1 Amazon best-selling book by Heather Clancy and myself, Niche Down, How to Become Legendary by Being Different. Check out nichedownbook.com. The amazing people at Verve Coffee, the official coffee of Legends and Losers, the leaders in West Coast craft coffee. Check them out in Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, and always at vervecoffee.com. The incredible new podcast. Thank you so much for making 6 Minutes of Legendary a hit. If you haven't checked it out yet, go to Apple Podcasts, and what you will discover is a new format where we take music and clips from Legends and Losers and put them together in what you might call a track or even a song. Check out 6 Minutes of Legendary wherever you check out podcasts. The great people at onelifefullylived.org. Dream, plan, and live your best life. This is the nonprofit helping you build financial success so that you can build overall life success. Equity Directory. If you're in the startup ecosystem, if you're a startup founder, if you work with startups, check out equitydirectory.com, where startups and people who work with them get together. Our good friends at Category Design Advisors. If you want to figure out how to niche down, if you want to figure out how to design and dominate your category, check out Category Design Advisors. Speaking of people that we love, John's Crazy Socks. John Cronin and his dad, Mark Cronin, might be the greatest entrepreneurial story I've ever heard. Check out episode 155 of Legends and Losers, and more importantly, go to johnscrazysocks.com right now to get your crazy socks. And why not leverage the power of a virtual assistant? If you're at a place in your life, in your career, where you need an assistant, why not get a virtual one? Check out Bottleneck Virtual Assistants at bottleneck.online. And the good people at kiva.org. Microloans, microfinance makes a giant difference to small entrepreneurs in the developing world. If you want to play in that game and make a giant difference, check out kiva.org. All right, we must remind you that this oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it right now. All rights do remain disturbed. We must warn you that this oddcast is clearly produced in a studio that does contain nuts. Support your local venture capitalist. Remember, we've got a water crisis here in California, so shower with a friend. As David Lee Roth said, I don't feel tardy. Never fry bacon naked. Remember, if you haven't changed your mind lately, how do you know you have one? Thank you, Dandy Candy. I love you, Mom and Dad. Hey, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together, doesn't it? Today, our deepest apologies go out to Harvey Weinstein. Sorry, Harv. We just ran out of time for you. That's it. We're out of here. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate you investing your life with us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on Legends and Losers.